Welcome back to another episode of the Raw Knowledge Podcast. This is the solo series with myself, Alex Connor, and today we're into part 3. So we're talking about macronutrients. We've talked so far in the series about behavior and lifestyle. We've talked about calories, energy balance in the last episode, and today we're talking about macronutrients. So again, we're going through sequentially, and we are unpacking the order of hierarchy from the most important factors all the way to the least when it comes to your nutrition. And for those of you who might have not listened to the other episodes, I do encourage you to do so in this solo series because they are meant to be listened to sequential. However, you can jump in if you're pretty up to speed with this sort of stuff. But again, this is all about me simplifying it, so I'm not going to go into too much science because, again, that would defeat the purpose. But obviously, we'll give you a bit of a takeaway and an application so you can actually, or should I say, the goal is to have the takeaway and the application so you can apply it straight away and understand it and have a starting point. But I will obviously go through the what's, the whys, and the hows because it's important to have a little bit of context as well. So thank you again for tuning in. And again, if you have enjoyed the other episodes and shared and listened to them, I appreciate that. Cool. So absolutely free, nothing to sell you. Let's dive in. So when we talk about macronutrients, we're thinking about the big nutrients. So macro meaning large, nutrients, in this case, relating to our protein, our fat, our carbohydrate, and our fiber. Okay. So obviously, everyone's familiar, or maybe familiar mostly with protein. It is the most important nutrient. Everything in our body generally is going to use protein. So it's not just for rebuilding and repairing muscle. It's for hair, skin, nails, organs, all of your major bodily functions and systems, so integumentary system, etc. So it's not just for, building muscle, which it kind of in this industry gets overused for. And a lot of the time, we've either got people under-consuming in protein or over-consuming in protein. And then we've got our fats. So fats, another essential nutrient for the body alongside protein and very critical. So again, when we're thinking about fats, we're thinking about cardiovascular health, we're thinking about joint health, we're thinking about brain function, etc. We're thinking about essential levels of body fat to keep us warm, and the list goes on. So we need body fat, we need good essential fatty acids, and again we're going to break the different types down, etc., and I'm going to give you some recommendations. And then we've got carbohydrate. This is a non-essential nutrient, which is a little bit controversial and contradictive because of the things I'm going to talk about with carbohydrate, but it is the main fuel source. It is the preferred fuel source of the body, despite what the keto cunts say about it. All right, we'll go in with that. But ultimately, just as a side note, so we can run on fats instead of carbohydrates. We can also run on protein as well, and there's all these big fancy words to describe it, which I'm not going to get into. But ultimately, the body prefers to run on carbohydrates. If you're on a desert island and you ran out of nutrients, the body would break down protein. It hates to do that, and we generally run on a combination of fats and carbohydrates depending on the intensity level of the activity. So right now, if I'm just sat here, I'm mostly going to be using fat as fuel. Might be using a little bit of carbohydrate, but not much. And as I increase that intensity, that ratio is going to skew towards carbohydrate. But again, that is where the body is utilizing a lot of the fuel through carbohydrate, especially for people listening to this. We're active, we're probably lifting in the gym. So it gets a bit of a bad rap and a misdemeanor carbs, but they are very, very critical for performance and health inside and outside the gym. So we've got our carbohydrates there for that, so mainly fuel sources. So do not underestimate the power of them. Then we've got our fiber, which does fall under the category of carbohydrate when we're counting it as a macronutrient. And again, fiber, we've got soluble and insoluble. So soluble meaning that it just dissolves in water, one that doesn't, usually together with vitamins and oils, etc. And we need fiber. It's important for our digestive health, it's important for our toilet time, and it helps us push everything through and stay regular. However, if we abuse fiber, we can get the opposite, where we can either get a little bit clogged up, or again, we can get a little bit loose. So we've just got to have some thoughts and some understanding of fiber, because again, it's usually either underconsumed or overconsumed, a little bit like protein, for different effects, and we'll go into that. So We talked about calculating our calories last time and how we did that, and I gave you some recommendations and some considerations to do that. And again, they were just starting points. There are many, many, many formulas you can use, but again, there's some that are a little bit better than others, and those are the things that we focused on. In this episode, now we're talking about macronutrients, I want to do the same thing. I want to give you some recommendations about calculating, or how to calculate, the amount of protein, fat, and carbs that you should be consuming every day, or at least a starting point that's in a healthy range, or even more bespoke to physique composition and performance, i.e. not the general average person, again, not that the average person exists, or general population, but someone who is more interested in quality of life, performance, and a more advanced body composition, not just an average one, which I think is important for all of us. So first of all, we'll start with protein, the most important nutrient. So it's important to understand that protein and both carbohydrate have 4 calories per gram. Now, fat has 9 calories per gram. So let's just think about that for a second. That's almost double and then a little bit more. So if we think about where maybe some of the verbiages or the ideologies around fat get a bad rap, like, oh, fat makes you fat. Well, not inherently, not just macronutrients or just a certain type of food makes you fat. It's an overconsumption of energy over time that's stored as body fat. So fats get a bad rap because they taste good, they're calorie dense, and we use them to flavor foods, and they're often found in combination with our favorite foods that are hyper palatable meaning they're really tasty, and usually they're laced with a carbohydrate and a fat combination. So let's think about ice cream, cookies, cakes, etc., right? You never hear about Dave on the news who's gone down and he's addicted to bloody eating just bananas or lettuce leaves, right? No, it's generally because the taste buds and the things that we crave are not within those foods. They're in, again, those combinations of fat and carbohydrates. But because fat accumulates really quickly, being double the amount of calories and then some of protein and carbs, it's really easy to go over your daily fat allowance or accumulate those calories quite fast. And then you find yourself in a calorie surplus and wonder why that you didn't actually lose weight. But it seemed that in your head, you didn't eat that much because maybe the fat, in this case, didn't occupy the same space or in terms of volume, and it didn't quite give you the satiety, meaning fullness, that a high protein or a higher volume meal of protein and carbohydrate would have. So when we start to unpack these things, we start to see where some of these myths come from, or maybe these misbeliefs that you might believe, or you've been told, or your friend Karen. Ironic, I use that name. Is that's bad for you. You can't eat that. You can't eat carbs. Or you can't eat fat. It makes you fat. Not the case. Again, it's a mathematical equation. We talked about this last time with energy balance, and it's about having a distribution of calories broken down into protein, fat, and carbs that are going to be good or are going to help you get to your goals by giving you adequate amounts of each nutrient to fuel health, performance, and again, your goals, whatever that may be. So, again, I've got some notes here, and I want to, instead of going through maybe all of the different avenues, I'm going to sort of stick to one main recommendation and just give you a little bit of a variance again. So again, important to understand that about the calories. Just a side note on alcohol as well, because often people will ask about this. This is its own category again. So alcohol is 7 calories per gram of alcohol or pure alcohol. Now, it will be the first thing to be utilized as fuel in the body. So if you consume alcohol, it's generally the first thing that the body will burn off because it's a toxin and a poison, and your body wants to process and get rid of it as quickly as it can. So you've got protein and carbohydrates, 4 calories per gram. You've got fat at 9 calories per gram, and then you've got alcohol at 7. So alcohol is the first one to be used as fuel, and then again, we're looking at fats and carbohydrate combinations depending on the intensity activity, and then if need be, protein sparing. It is gluconeogenesis, big fancy word, if it really gets to that point, but generally it won't, especially if you're not in a state of starvation, you're not on a desert island and you've got regular food. Even if it's fasting, believe it or not, you can go periods of time as long as fuel stores and body fat stores are high. So moving on to the protein recommendation. So as a roundabout rule of thumb, it does really depend on your body composition, your body fat. So for example, If we have someone who is 100 kilos and they are 7% body fat, and we have someone who's 100 kilos and they're 25% body fat, their protein requirements are not going to be the same. So if we do this calculation as a recommendation of 2 grams per kilo of body weight, that might be good for someone who's at a relative level of body fat that is not super high or super low. So what I would suggest is getting an estimated lean mass of your body fat and doing at least 2 grams per kilo of lean body mass. However, we know that having a higher protein intake promotes fat loss and lots of other health benefits. So to give you a range of protein, at the minimum, based on what we know, again, from evidence and current literature, 1.3 per kilo of lean body mass, all the way up to sort of 2.8 at a very high end can be where you want to sit. I use 2 as a bit of a middle ground because, again, it depends on what you're calculating that off. So say, for example, now my total body weight is 75 kilos times 2, right? So that there is probably a little bit low in protein for me. Also, we've got to think, if we're tracking this via MyFitnessPal and you've been doing this already, you'll find that a lot of the time your protein's higher because you've got trace proteins in foods, meaning other foods that are not complete proteins that contain protein elements, okay, traces of protein that add up to accumulate your total protein. So we want to make sure that we're kind of overestimating that and getting complete protein. So while we're on the topic, what is a complete protein? So a complete protein is something that contains all the essential amino acids. So we've got essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids, which create a protein. So we've got 9 essential, 11 non-essential, and there's hypothesized that there's a few more, but we won't go into that because, again, I don't think the findings have come through with that. So anything that's got a complete protein is generally your dairy and your animal products, etc., or your whey protein blends. So if you're someone who is plant-based or vegan or vegetarian or pescatarian or whatever it is, you might have to be a little bit smarter about where your protein is coming from, and you might need to use combinations. Like, for example, you might take black beans and brown rice, and together they create a complete protein. But obviously, where possible, animal sources are more advantageous of getting a complete protein because the body can derive the amino acids from them more efficiently. They're more bioavailable. The body recognizes them more. They can take that protein. Doesn't mean you can't do it as a plant-based athlete. It just means you've got to be a little bit smarter and possibly have that protein intake a little bit higher just to cover off for any possibility that you're not quite getting that total quality, or again, that bioavailability from the protein, from the food that your body can actually take and use in the body, utilize. So I would probably aim for at least 2 grams at minimum, all the way up to 2.5 to 2.8 at the high end. Once we get to about 3 grams, that's when we start to see maybe some possible negative effects. We can have a little bit of gastrointestinal distress, a lot of wind, a lot of farting, come from overconsumption of protein, but also fiber. Also, if we overconsume in protein, we're probably just going to be wasting it. We're just going to excrete it out, and it's not actually going to be used. So I think men and bodybuilders are probably more guilty of this, just over-consuming way much protein, having some pretty interesting toilet times and some pretty nasty farts. So again, don't go over the top with your protein. But again, I think the 2 grams up to the 2.5 for most people with a relative body fat that's not super low or high is a good place to start. But once again, it's a starting point, and you can utilize this. If you calculated your calories last time, you can see how all of this fits in. So say, for example, you go, cool, I've calculated that I'm going to eat 180 grams of protein per day. Cool. So that's 180 times 4. Because that's how many that's how many calories per gram of protein, and that will give me the calorie amount. And then I could add that together with my fat and my carbohydrate, and I could see if it fits in with my calories, right? So say you calculated 2,200 calories, you could be like, okay, that's 800 calories or whatever it is from protein. So you might add your protein and your fats, and then carbohydrates make up the remainder, because that's the most fluctuating factor, because that's your fuel source. Think about fuel in your car. The further you want to go, the more work you want to do, the more fuel you've got to put in the car. So someone who is highly active, someone who's doing more training, will need more fuel, hence more calories. Okay, so fats. We're going to go in order of hierarchy. So fats, again, essential to support life. We want to aim for about, at least, at the very minimum, at the very low end, 0.5 per kilo of body weight, or again, lean mass of body weight, I probably would start at 1. 0.5 is more comp prep, or when we're really getting to those lower thresholds, or again, if there's medical interventions that require you to be on a very low fat intake. But I'd aim for about that 1 gram mark per kilo of body weight. Again, as long as you're not super overweight, super lean, again, you might need more. So again, if I'm 75 kilos and I aim for 75 grams of fat per day, and again, I'm probably on the leaner side of life, but I'm not super high body fat, I'm not super low, I'm going to be finding that that's probably a good place for me to be, to get some of those, or should I say, to get those fats in. So we've got when it comes to our fats, we've got essential fatty acids, and we want to make sure that most of our fats are coming from good quality sources. So we've got polyunsaturated fat, we've got monounsaturated fat, we've got omega-3, 6, and 9, we've got saturated fats, and then we've got transaturated fats. So you may have heard that the transaturated fats, are the devil, or evil, or saturated. Transaturated is completely unnatural, man-made, if you will. So we generally want to reduce as much as that as we can. So again, if we follow the recommendations that we went over in the first episode, most of the food is from whole foods that we're consuming. A lot of these saturated fats are going to be found in our processed foods, so foods that are in packets, etc., or again, are heavily processed, i.e., think about something like a Pop-Tart, or a probably candy floss, or something that is heavily tainted with to create a certain product, lots of colorings, preservatives, etc. Saturated fat, though, is not completely the devil. We still need some in our diet, although we generally want most of the good fatty acids. So poly and mono relate to the composition of the molecule of fat. So poly meaning many, mono meaning one, and it's the same when we go into carbohydrate types as well. And then again, we want to think about our heart health, omega-3, 6, and 9, and we can get a lot of that from our oily fish. So if we're thinking about, how do we compose our fats, we want to think about nuts and nut butters, oils. Again, seed oils are not great. Generally want to be going for more of your olive oils, avocado oils, macadamia oils, nut oils again. Dark chocolate, not a main source carbohydrate, slightly but high in fat too. And then we want to think about our oily fish and fish oil. So if you're not consuming oily fish 1 to 2 times a week, this is where you may want to think about getting a krill oil or a fish oil supplement, which is really going to help as well. Get those essential fatty acids in, and again from other meat products too. So again, I'd recommend probably going for a leaner cut of meat, but even then you're going to find that that's going to contribute to your fat intake as well. Just as long as it's not coming from total saturated fats, usually deep fried or again heavily processed foods, and you get a handful or you get a majority from the sources I mentioned, you're going to be standing in good stead. Also, we've got cholesterol as well, so we've got HDL and LDL. So LDL is usually what builds up on the arterial walls of the arteries. So if we think about the circumference of the arteries and that LDL builds around it, creates a smaller passage for the blood to flow through. That gets clogged up. It's usually when a heart attack occurs. HDL, good fatty acids, will help clean the arterial walls and keep those arteries less clogged and more healthy. So when we talk about cholesterol and fat intake and the ratios, they're the things we want to consider. But again, let's leave it there because probably starting to get a little bit deeper down the rabbit hole with that. And then we move to carbohydrates. Oh, just before I leave fats, you can go up slightly higher as well. So again, if you are someone who likes a higher fat intake to a point, you can get up to that 1.52 grams, and you might reduce your carbohydrates if you find that's better for you. I personally wouldn't recommend going keto. It's very unsustainable, and it is not conducive to performance, and many studies and meta-analyses show and prove this. Also, a life without carbohydrates, pretty sad, pretty boring. Anyway, it is a personal preference. In terms of carbohydrate, we're looking anywhere, well, this is going to be a range. So again, this is our fuel source, and we talked about that. So if we've calculated our calories from protein and our calories from fat, we have a remaining set of calories left. So if you've calculated, once again, say 2,000 or 2,200, and you say now have got 800 or 900 calories left or 1,000 calories left, you could reverse engineer that, divide it by 4, and find out, okay, that's how many carbohydrates or grams of carbs I'm going to have a day. And again, you can play around with the fats and carbs a little bit, depending on the food, your diet, your environment, what you personally like. I wouldn't obviously do that to a point. I'd still have carbs being the higher input. and then you can adjust accordingly. So if we're looking at a range, carbohydrates, I would range from 2 all the way up to 5 grams per kilo of body weight, or again, lean body mass, depending on your body fat or your body composition. Now, obviously, if you're on the low end, this is someone that might be more sedentary. So if you're someone who sits in a chair all day, you don't do a lot of moving, again, you're not going to need a lot of fuel. Like a car, you're not doing a lot of journeying, you're not doing a lot of miles. And then also, if you're someone, conversely, who is highly active, again, say you're someone on a road, you're doing road works, you're doing something physical, laboring, you might be a landscaper, you're going to be burning a lot of calories, and then factor in your training as well. You're going to need a lot of carbohydrate, or more carbohydrate generally than someone who is sat down doing nothing all day. So again, choose something accordingly to get started with that is going to be appropriate, and then adjust accordingly. Also, if you've started off with calories that seem really high and you can't seem to eat that amount of food, do not force yourself. Start with what you can and then increase accordingly, especially if the goal is to perhaps maintain your weight or build muscle or even lose weight. A lot of people are dramatically under eating most of the time, but the reason why they're putting on body fat or maintaining it is because they have a few days of the week where they just completely blow out or have very high calorie dense meals, or they're drinking a lot of alcohol. So it doesn't seem like they're eating much at all and they're not losing weight, but the energy balance equation never lies. So this is usually a big predication for people who are not losing weight and don't feel like they're eating a lot of food. And as we talked about before, foods that are higher in calories and are more dense occupy less space in the stomach, so they give the illusion that we're not eating as much. So I could have 2 tables here in front of us right now, and I could show you 2,000 calories, which would cover a whole table and look like a feast. Or I could show you 2,000 calories in the space of my fist, and that might be a really highly fatty, dense, baked good that, a big slice of cheesecake, that's 2,000 calories. Or thereof, especially if it's got a serving of ice cream and cream on it. And you might go, well, which one would you have? And when you look at it like that, you can start to see how easy it is to over-consume in calories. You have a few of those untracked high-dense meals every week, and you've stalled your fat loss, or you're not losing weight, or you've put more body fat on again. And then alcohol, look, I will talk about a recommendation for that, because I do not believe you have to not drink alcohol whatsoever. We know, based on, again, the literature and the studies, that you can still consume a lower intake of alcohol, moderate intake of alcohol, and still be healthy and, improve and make gains and do all these things you want to do. So this really comes down to personal preference. I personally don't drink a lot because it doesn't make me feel great, but also I don't really crave a lot of alcohol, although I do enjoy the taste when I'm going to have a drink. So if I'm out with friends or a restaurant, if there's a drink that complements the meal, or there is a drink that I want to try, I will definitely have it, but I don't drink to get drunk. I drink to enjoy the drink itself, to complement the meal or the company that I'm with. So this is where, if you're someone who likes alcohol and you like the taste of it, and you still want to have some and you still want to intake it, you don't have to give it up, but you just have to moderate that intake. So, 1 to 2 standard drinks a day might be what you can get away with. Now, I wouldn't recommend drinking every day, but you'd be better to spread it out than, say, having those 14 drinks on a Saturday. Because people go, oh, if I take all those drinks, I could have like 7 or 8 on the weekend. It's like, yeah, but it's the totality of poison that's hitting the body and the system, and your body's got to clear that up, right? It's a toxin, it's a poison, it slows down the body. There's all these negative effects you know about. So it's not great in large quantities. So you're better to spread it out in moderation. If you're someone who enjoys, a little bit of wine through the week, have a couple of glasses of wine in the week, spread it out. You do not have to get rid of it. And yes, some alcohol does have some antioxidant benefits, i.e. red wine, but for the most part, it is a toxin. Is it a poison? We do not want to abuse it. So if you're serious about your health, you probably want to err on the side of moderation, but I do believe that you can still, and what we know, include alcohol in a balanced diet with a healthy lifestyle and still be absolutely fine and still make progress depending on what it is. So yeah, you can keep that in mind if you like a drink. You don't have to go teetotal, because again, there's a lot of misconceptions about eating clean food, chicken and rice, 7 times a day, doing 1,000 crunches, doing loads of cardio, and, having no life. And that is not the case. It's just about understanding these principles that we're unpacking in these episodes. And if we do that, we can actually manipulate our results and have an enjoyable, flexible, and sustainable lifestyle. So let's do a bit of a quick, I'm just mixing my words up now. a quick recap. So today we've talked about macronutrients, we've talked about protein, we've talked about fat, we've talked about carbohydrates, we've talked briefly about the roles, what they do in the body, we've talked about the energy equation, how many calories there are per gram, and we've given some recommendations as well about how you could calculate, or a starting point of a range that you could utilize for your protein, fat, and carb intake. So for protein, again, 2 to 2.5, I'm going to leave it at that recommendation for most people. 1 gram to 1.5 with fats per kilo of body weight, and carbohydrates, again, it's going to fluctuate between 2 to 5. It could even be more or less, again, depending on your activity level. Alcohol, again, keeping it more to a minimum. You might go to all the way from 2 to 4 standard drinks a week. And I've just remembered fiber, which we did talk about. So fiber recommendations, this one's nice and easy. And again, this is individual. For every 1,000 calories you consume, 10 to 15 grams of fiber to coincide with that. So if you're having 2,000 calories a day, you could have 20 grams of fiber, or you could have 30 grams of fiber. But I would test this out. Men usually can tolerate fiber fairly well at a higher range and a lower range, where females generally a little bit more sensitive. So you may want to play around with that by starting off at a moderate range depending on the calories you're consuming, and then adjusting accordingly depending on your digestion levels, your bloating, if you do get bloated, and it is fiber, and even your toilet time as well, which we might not get into in this episode, but it is important to just keep an eye on that. A lot of people don't. But be aware of toilet time, be aware of your digestion. It is important. So there are some things to consider with your macronutrients. So I'm going to leave it there. As ever, if you've got any questions, send me a message. If you found this valuable, send me a comment, share it with a friend, share it with someone who you think will also be able to implement this. Thank you again for listening, tuning in, watching, wherever you're at. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, you know the deal. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or your podcast, your Apple podcast, please just share it, put it on your story, anything. I know it takes 2 seconds, but it really helps, help more people, and, get more people listening to this podcast and improving their physique and their health. And if you want to know more, then, if you've got any coaching inquiries as well, DM me for that, and we can have a chat and see if it's a good fit. All right, until next time, Lions, stay fearless. For those of you who are confused, frustrated, and sick and tired of not seeing the results that you want or deserve, make sure that you click the Apply for Coaching button in the description below and line up a completely free consultation with myself, where we can discover if it's a good fit as a client and coach, and take your health and physique to the next level once and for all.